The grand ballroom at Rosewood Manor sparkled under three massive crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and gold-leafed columns that soared 30 feet to an ornate ceiling. Mom had transformed the historic venue into a wonderland for her 50th birthday celebration. White orchids and roses cascading from every surface, champagne fountains bubbling at strategic locations, and enough luxury to supply a royal wedding. 80 of the most prominent families in our exclusive community had gathered to celebrate Victoria Blackwood's milestone birthday. These were people whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings, whose charitable donations shaped local politics, whose business decisions affected thousands of jobs across the region. The guest list read like a who's who of old money and new wealth, all gathered to honor one of their most respected members. The Rosewood Manor estate itself was legendary, a 12,000-square-foot mansion built by railroad magnates in the 1920s, sitting on 15 acres of manicured grounds that had been featured in Architectural Digest 4 times. It was exactly the kind of venue that established someone's position in the social hierarchy of our affluent suburb. And there I was, standing near the champagne fountain in my simple navy dress from Macy's, feeling like I'd crashed the wrong party. Gabriella. Mom's voice cut through the ambient chatter with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to commanding attention at large social gatherings. Victoria Blackwood approached me with her signature smile, the one that graced charity gala programs and society magazine covers, radiant and perfectly calculated. At 50, Mom was stunning in the way that only came from unlimited resources and professional maintenance. Her Valentino gown probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her diamond jewelry could have funded several small businesses, and her hair had been styled by the same team that prepared A-list celebrities for award shows. "Darling," she said, air-kissing near my cheek without actually making contact, "there you are. I was just telling Mrs. Richardson about your little event planning venture." The way she said "little event planning venture" made it sound like I was organizing birthday parties for neighborhood children rather than running a professional business. Mrs. Richardson, the wife of our county's most successful commercial developer, turned toward me with polite interest. She was wearing what I recognized as haute couture, probably $30,000 worth of designer craftsmanship that she'd purchased during her last shopping trip to Paris. "How delightful, dear," Mrs. Richardson said with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for discussing someone's volunteer work at the local animal shelter. "Victoria tells me you've been organizing small events and parties. Such creative work." Before I could respond, Mom launched into her carefully rehearsed explanation. "Gabriella's been getting hands-on experience with event coordination. You know how important it is for young people to understand hospitality from the ground up. She's been handling logistics, vendor management, that sort of practical experience." The way she described it made me sound like someone learning basic life skills rather than someone who'd been building a sophisticated event management company for the past 5 years. "How wonderful," Mrs. Richardson nodded approvingly. "And are you working with local venues? Perhaps some of the smaller reception halls downtown?" "I work with various venues," I replied carefully. "Both local and regional properties." "Oh, like the community centers and hotel meeting rooms?" Mrs. Richardson's tone suggested she was trying to be supportive about what was obviously a modest beginning in event planning. "Among others," I said neutrally. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd coached me extensively on how to discuss my work at events like this, emphasize the learning experience, downplay any significant business success, and never mention specific venues or client lists that might make their wealthy friends uncomfortable. According to Mom, discussing actual business achievements at elegant social gatherings was inappropriate. Better to present my work as character-building experience that would eventually prepare me for the more important business of marrying someone from a suitable family and managing charity events as a volunteer. "Well," Mrs. Richardson said with finality, "I'm sure you're learning valuable lessons about organization and customer service. Those skills will serve you well when you're ready to focus on more substantial social responsibilities." The implication was clear. What I was doing now was practice for the real work of being a proper wife and mother in our social circle. Mom nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased with how the conversation was being framed. "That's exactly what we've told her. Gabriella's always been very independent. But she's learning that there's more to life than just business ventures. Family, community involvement, social obligations, These things matter more than profit margins. I excused myself and walked toward the bar area, needing some distance from conversations about my apparently temporary career phase before I focused on more appropriate pursuits. The bartender, a professional I'd worked with on numerous high-end events, smiled as he prepared my drink. "How are you enjoying the party, Miss Blackwood?" "It's beautiful," I replied honestly. Mom had exquisite taste when it came to event planning and execution. "Your mother certainly knows how to create a memorable celebration," he observed, gesturing around the opulent ballroom. "I've worked a lot of these society parties, but this one is exceptional. The logistics alone must have been incredible to coordinate." "She's very talented," I agreed, though my relationship with these social gatherings was more complicated than he could imagine. Before I could elaborate, I spotted my stepfather making his way through the crowd toward me. James Blackwood commanded attention wherever he went. At 6'2" with distinguished silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades in investment banking, he was the embodiment of financial success and social prominence. "Gabriella." James's voice carried the warmth he used for important client meetings and board presentations. "There's my stepdaughter. How are you finding your mother's celebration?" "Everything's perfect," I replied sincerely. "She's created something truly special. While your mother has always had impeccable taste, 50 years deserves a proper celebration, especially when those years have been as productive as Victoria's." He gestured around the elegant venue. "Speaking of productivity, your mother mentioned you've been expanding your event planning work. Very enterprising of you." James had always been supportive of my business interests, even when Mom's concern about my unmarried status was obvious. He'd married into our family when I was 22, bringing considerable wealth and social connections that had elevated our position significantly. "I've been fortunate to work with some interesting clients," I said carefully. "That's the spirit. Building a service business requires real dedication and attention to detail." He lowered his voice slightly. "Though between you and me, your mother is getting concerned that you're becoming too focused on work and not enough on the social connections that lead to appropriate marriage prospects." I'd heard this concern many times, the gentle suggestion that my business success was distracting me from the more important task of finding a suitable husband from our social circle. "I understand her concerns," I said. "She loves you, Gabriella. We both do. But sometimes love means encouraging someone to think beyond immediate career satisfaction toward long-term family goals." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chin, my operations director. "Rosewood Manor event is flawless as expected. Client satisfaction surveys are all 10 out of 10. Also, the Henderson estate wants to book us for their daughter's wedding $2.3 million budget. Your reputation is spreading fast." I quickly silenced my phone and slipped it back into my purse, but not before James noticed the interruption. "Work update?" he asked with gentle amusement. "Just some client feedback." "Ah, well, it's good that you're building relationships in the event planning industry, even if it's still in the early stages of development. Shows professionalism and commitment to service." Before I could respond, Mom's voice rang out across the ballroom, calling everyone's attention for what appeared to be a birthday speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced from the small stage where a string quartet had been performing, "James and I want to thank you all for being here tonight to make my 50th birthday so memorable." Polite applause filled the grand space. 50 years feels like both a lifetime and just the beginning," she continued, her voice carrying perfectly across the ballroom. "I've been blessed with love, friendship, and the opportunity to be part of this wonderful community." More applause, warmer this time. "Most importantly," Mom said, her tone becoming more personal, "I've been blessed with family. My husband James has brought stability and prosperity to my life in ways I never imagined possible." James smiled warmly from where he stood near the edge of the gathering. "And my daughter Gabriella represents the next generation of Blackwood women, though she's still finding her place in our social circle," Mom continued, her eyes finding mine across the ballroom. I felt heat creep up my neck as 80 successful, socially prominent people turned their attention toward me. Gabriella has been exploring various business interests, event planning, hospitality coordination, that sort of thing, which shows wonderful entrepreneurial spirit, even if it's not quite the path we might have expected. The subtle disapproval in her tone was unmistakable to anyone who knew her well. However, Mom's voice gained confidence as she delivered what was clearly a carefully planned message. I'm hopeful that she'll soon realize that true fulfillment for women in our position comes not from commercial pursuits, but from building meaningful family relationships and contributing to our community through appropriate social leadership. Around the ballroom, I could see people nodding approvingly at this hope that the Blackwood daughter would eventually settle into more traditional expectations. Which brings me to an important family announcement, Mom said, her tone shifting toward what I recognized as her decision-making voice. Oh no, Gabriella, sweetheart, your stepfather and I have been discussing your future, and we've decided it's time for some significant changes in your living arrangements and life priorities. The ballroom fell silent as everyone realized they were about to witness what was clearly a planned family conversation disguised as birthday celebration commentary. You're 28 years old, Mom continued, and while we've supported your independence and business experiments, it's time to be realistic about what's appropriate for someone from our family. I could feel 80 pairs of eyes studying me, watching to see how I would respond to what was clearly going to be a public declaration of family expectations. The event planning work has been a valuable learning experience, James added from his position near the stage, but it's not a career path that's suitable for someone with your background and social obligations. It's time to focus on finding an appropriate husband and preparing to take on the kind of community leadership role that our family's position requires. Furthermore, Mom said, her voice gaining authority as she delivered what was clearly a prepared ultimatum, we think you should move out of the family estate and find your own place while you transition to a more appropriate lifestyle. Living at home at your age sends the wrong message about your maturity and readiness for marriage. Around the ballroom, I could see people nodding approvingly at this practical approach to encouraging their daughter to embrace adult responsibilities. You have until Monday to pack your belongings and find alternative accommodation, Mom announced with finality. We love you, but we won't continue to enable choices that don't align with our family's values and community standing. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Move out and conform to their expectations, or be cut off from family support and financial assistance. And if I refuse? I asked quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom. Then we're calling the police to remove you from our property, Mom declared, her voice rising with frustration at my apparent defiance. We will not continue to support behavior that embarrasses our family and undermines our position in this community. The threat was delivered with absolute certainty: conform or be forcibly removed from the family home. I stood there for a moment processing what had just happened. In front of 80 of the most prominent people in our community, my mother had given me an ultimatum: abandon my business career and find a husband, or be evicted from the family home. Move out by Monday or we're calling police, Mom repeated, her voice sharp with authority and embarrassment at my public resistance to their reasonable demands. I smiled calmly and reached into my purse, pulling out an official-looking document that I'd been carrying all evening. Actually, Mom, I said quietly, I have something for you. I walked across the ballroom floor toward where she stood on the stage, aware that 80 people were watching my every movement with obvious curiosity. When I reached her, I handed her the document with a gentle smile. What is this? She asked, though something in my expression was making her look uncertain for the first time all evening. It's an eviction notice, I replied calmly. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The words seemed to echo across the silent ballroom as Mom stared at the document in her hands. What are you talking about? She whispered. I'm talking about the fact that Elegance Properties LLC, my real estate investment company, purchased the Rosewood Manor estate 6 months ago when the previous owners defaulted on their mortgage payments. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the soft classical music that had been playing in the background throughout the evening. You bought. Mom's voice was barely audible. I bought this property along with the furnishings, the grounds, and all associated assets for $14.7 million. You've been living as my tenants since February, though the property management company probably didn't make that distinction clear in your rental agreements. Around the ballroom, 80 of the most financially sophisticated people in our community were staring at this exchange with expressions of complete bewilderment. But this is our home, James said weakly, stepping up onto the stage. We've lived here for 8 years. We have ownership papers, property taxes, insurance policies. You had ownership papers, I corrected gently. The bank foreclosed when you defaulted on the balloon payment that came due in January. Rather than let them auction the property to strangers, Elegance Properties purchased it directly from the bank and allowed you to continue living here as tenants. The room had gone completely quiet as everyone processed what they were hearing. Elegance Properties, Mrs. Richardson repeated slowly. Who owns Elegance Properties? Instead of answering directly, I gestured toward the document Mom was still holding with trembling hands. The signature on that eviction notice should answer your question, I said calmly. Mom looked down at the paper, her face going completely white as she read the signature line. Gabriella Blackwood, CEO and founder, Elegance Properties LC, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. The words seemed to ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. You own this house, Mom said numbly. I own this house, the grounds, the furniture, and about 47 other properties across 3 states, including most of the venues where your friends hold their social events. Each revelation seemed to hit the ballroom like a physical blow. But Gabriella, Dr. Martinez's wife said weakly, you said you worked with local venues. You said you did small event planning. I do work with local venues, the ones I own. And I do handle event planning, including events with budgets exceeding $2 million for clients whose names would be familiar to everyone in this room. The scope of what I was describing was starting to sink in. How many properties? James asked faintly. 48 properties currently, with a combined value of approximately $160 million. Hotels, event venues, restaurants, and residential properties that cater to high-end clients across the region. The number seemed to echo in the silent ballroom. $160 million? Mom repeated mechanically. That's the conservative appraisal for insurance purposes. The actual market value is probably closer to $200 million. Dr. Martinez was the first to ask the obvious question. Gabriella, how long have you been building this real estate portfolio? 5 years. I started with a single small venue when I was 23, reinvested all profits into acquiring additional properties, and gradually built what's now one of the most successful hospitality and event management companies in the region. Around the ballroom, I could see people trying to reconcile this revelation with their assumptions about my small-scale event planning work. You've been running a $200 million company, Mom said slowly, while we thought you were coordinating birthday parties and small wedding receptions. I coordinate birthday parties and wedding receptions. I just coordinate them at venues I own, for clients who pay premium rates for exclusive access to luxury properties. The technical truth of my earlier descriptions was starting to become clear. Including this party, James realized. You coordinated your own mother's birthday celebration. Mom wanted to hold her party at Rosewood Manor. I made sure she could book the venue, even though we typically require 6 months advance notice for events of this scale. The irony was impossible to ignore. Mom had been celebrating her 50th birthday at a venue owned by the daughter she was evicting. Mrs. Richardson was looking around the opulent ballroom with new eyes. Gabriella, you own Rosewood Manor? Among other properties. The Wellington Hotel where the charity ball is held every year, the Grandview Country Club where most of your friends hold their wedding receptions, the historic Riverside Mansion that hosts the annual Symphony Gala. Those are all Elegance Properties venues. Each venue I mentioned was legendary in our social circle, properties that defined luxury events for the wealthy families in our community. We've been holding our events at your properties, Dr. Martinez's wife said with amazement. For the past 3 years, yes. Elegance Properties handles about 60% of the high-end social events in our region, though we maintain discretion about our client relationships. The realization that I'd been secretly managing their social lives while they thought I was learning basic event planning seemed to stun everyone into silence. But why? Mom asked desperately. Why didn't you tell us what you were really building? Why let us think you were just playing around with small events? I looked around at the faces surrounding me. People who had spent the evening treating me like someone who needed their patience while I figured out how to be successful like them. Because I wanted to see if you could be proud of me when you thought I was unsuccessful. The words landed like a challenge. We are proud of you, Mom protested automatically. We've always been proud of you. Have you? Because 10 minutes ago, you publicly evicted me from what you thought was your house because you were embarrassed by my career choices. You threatened to call police to remove me from property that I actually own. Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. You said that my business work was inappropriate for someone from our family. You announced that I needed to abandon my career and focus on finding a husband. You declared that my choices were embarrassing to your social position. The accuracy of these recollections was written across her face. But the irony, I continued, is that while you were embarrassed by what you thought was my failure to achieve appropriate success, I was actually more successful than you'd ever imagined. Successful enough to buy your house when you couldn't afford the mortgage payments. Successful enough to let you continue living here while you criticized my business choices. James was staring at the eviction notice like it contained impossible information. Gabriella, we had no idea you were supporting us financially. You had no idea because you never asked what my business actually involved. You saw what you expected to see, your daughter playing around with small event planning, and you never looked deeper. But we were trying to help you, Mom said weakly. We were concerned about your future, your security, your social position. You were concerned about your own social position. You were embarrassed that your daughter wasn't married and wasn't pursuing the kind of traditional success that would enhance your reputation in this community. The brutal honesty of this assessment seemed to break something in her. Furthermore, I said, pulling out my phone to show them the latest business reports, while you were worried about my financial security, Elegance Properties has been one of the most profitable hospitality companies in the state for the past 2 years. How profitable? James asked weakly. Annual revenues of approximately $47 million, with profit margins that most real estate investment firms would envy. The numbers seemed to stagger everyone present. $47 million, Mom repeated numbly. This year we're projecting $52 million. Thanks to expansion into 2 new markets and the acquisition of 3 additional luxury venues. Dr. Martinez was shaking his head in amazement. Gabriella, you've built something extraordinary. A $50 million hospitality empire while we thought you were learning basic event coordination. And you did it while allowing us to live in your house, James added, his voice thick with regret and amazement. I looked at these 2 people who had shaped so much of my adult life, who had driven me to succeed partly to earn their approval and partly to prove I didn't need it. The real tragedy, I said quietly, is that you were so focused on what you thought I should be achieving that you never noticed what I was actually building. We failed you completely, Mom whispered, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. We failed to see the incredible businesswoman our daughter had become. You didn't fail me, I replied. But you did fail to see me clearly. There's a difference. I walked over to where the bartender was standing, clearly having overheard this entire exchange. Miguel, I said calmly, could you make sure all our guests have fresh champagne? I'd like to make a toast. Of course, Miss Blackwood, he replied with obvious respect. Should I also bring the special champagne you had me reserve for tonight? Perfect. Thank you. As servers began circulating through the ballroom with fresh glasses of Dom Perignon, I returned to the stage where Mom and James were still standing in shocked silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the gathering, I hope you've enjoyed celebrating my mother's 50th birthday at Rosewood Manor. Polite applause, though everyone was clearly still processing what they'd witnessed. I wanted to take this opportunity to share some news about Elegance Properties and our expansion plans for the coming year. The room fell silent as 80 of the most socially prominent people in our region focused on what was clearly going to be a business announcement. Elegance Properties will be opening 3 new luxury venues in the next 18 months, including a destination wedding resort in the mountains and a historic mansion in Charleston that will host exclusive corporate retreats. Several people were taking notes now, clearly realizing they were hearing insider information about venues they might want to book for future events. Furthermore, I continued, we're launching a luxury event planning service that will provide complete coordination for high-end celebrations, from intimate family gatherings to large-scale corporate functions. Mrs. Richardson raised her hand. Will this service be available for existing clients? Absolutely. In fact, several of you have already worked with our planning team without realizing it. The Henderson anniversary last month, the Phillips wedding reception, the Martinez charity gala. Those were all coordinated by Elegance Properties staff. The revelation that I'd been secretly managing their social events for months seemed to amaze everyone present. We believe in providing exceptional service while maintaining complete discretion about our client relationships, I explained. Your events succeed because of careful planning and attention to detail, Not because of who owns the venues. James stepped forward. Gabriella, what does this mean for us? For our living situation? I looked at these two people who had tried to evict me from property I owned, who had threatened to call police to remove me from my own house. It means you can continue living at Rosewood Manor as long as you'd like, I said calmly. The eviction notice was just to make a point. This is your home and I have no intention of changing that. But we can't afford the mortgage payments, Mom said desperately. That's why we lost the house in the first place. There are no mortgage payments. Elegance Properties owns the property outright. You can continue living here as my guests, or we can work out a rental arrangement that fits your budget, or we can discuss other options that make sense for everyone. The relief on both their faces was immediate and overwhelming. However, I continued, I do expect some changes in how we communicate about my work and my life choices. Both of them nodded eagerly. I expect you to ask questions about what I'm actually building instead of assuming you understand my business. I expect you to support my success instead of being embarrassed by what you think is my failure. And I expect you to respect my choices even when they don't conform to your expectations about appropriate behavior for women from our social circle. Of course, Mom said quickly. Gabriella, we want to support you properly. We want to understand what you've built and be proud of it publicly. And we want to learn from you, James added. About business, about real estate, about building something meaningful rather than just maintaining social appearances. I looked around the ballroom at 80 people who had witnessed this family drama play out in real time, all of them now understanding that the quiet young woman they'd been politely tolerating was actually one of the most successful businesspeople in their community. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the gathering, thank you for celebrating my mother's birthday with us. I hope you'll consider Elegance Properties for your future event needs. Miguel has business cards at the bar for anyone interested in learning more about our services. As people began approaching Miguel for information about booking venues and event planning services, I walked over to where Mom and James were standing together, both of them still looking stunned by everything they'd learned. Thank you, Mom said quietly, for letting us stay, for supporting us financially, for building something incredible while we were too blind to see it. And thank you for showing us who you really are, James added. I'm sorry it took an eviction notice to make us pay attention. I hugged them both, feeling for the first time in years like they were seeing me clearly instead of seeing their disappointment in who they thought I should be. Happy birthday, Mom, I said. I hope you enjoyed your party. It was perfect, she replied, tears in her eyes. The most perfect birthday I could have imagined, even if it didn't end the way I expected. Especially because it didn't end the way you expected, I corrected with a smile. 6 months later, I was featured on the cover of Hospitality Business magazine. The article was titled, The Secret Empire: How Gabriella Blackwood Built a Luxury Event Dynasty While Her Family Thought She Was Learning Party Planning. It told the story of Elegance Properties, of the innovative approaches to luxury hospitality that had made me one of the youngest successful venue owners in the country, of the business philosophy that had turned event coordination into real estate empire building. But it also told the story of my family, of the assumptions they'd made and how those assumptions had been shattered at a birthday party that changed everything. It discussed the complexity of family relationships when success doesn't look traditional, and the importance of asking questions before making judgments about people's achievements. The article included a photo of our family at the grand opening of our new Charleston venue, Mom, James, and I standing together in front of the historic mansion that would become Elegance Properties' flagship destination resort, all of us smiling genuinely as we discussed the company's expansion plans. The caption read, The Blackwood Family Today, Building Success Together on Honest Foundations. It wasn't perfect. Relationships that had been damaged by false assumptions take time to rebuild. But it was real and it was based on truth instead of expectations. And for the first time since I'd started Elegance Properties, I felt like my family could see me for who I really was instead of who they'd wanted me to be. The daughter they'd tried to evict owned the house they'd been trying to evict me from. And now, finally, they could see the difference.